The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as General Marcus Webb stepped out of his black sedan. At 52, he carried himself with the practiced confidence of a man who had spent 3 decades climbing the ranks of the army. His chest displayed rows of medals and ribbons that told stories of battles fought and wars won. Today was supposed to be a routine inspection of the new recruits at Fort Harrison. Nothing more than a standard visit to ensure the training programs were meeting his expectations. As he walked through the base, soldiers snapped to attention and saluted with crisp precision. General Webb acknowledged each one with a brief nod, his sharp eyes taking in every detail of their uniforms and posture. Everything appeared to be in perfect order, just as he expected from one of the country's premier training facilities. The training yard buzzed with activity as hundreds of new recruits went through their morning exercises. Some were running laps around the track, their breathing heavy in the cool morning air. Others were practicing combat drills, their movements still awkward, but improving with each repetition. General Webb watched them with the critical eye of someone who had seen thousands of young people transform from civilians into soldiers. Captain Rodriguez, the base training officer, approached with a clipboard in hand. He was a thin man with nervous energy, who always seemed to be checking and rechecking his notes. "Good morning, General Webb. Everything is proceeding according to schedule. The recruits are performing well above average for this stage of training." General Webb nodded but continued his visual inspection. His attention was drawn to a group of recruits practicing marksmanship at the shooting range. Even from a distance, he could see that one particular shooter was hitting targets with remarkable consistency. The sound of gunfire echoed across the training ground as recruits took turns firing at targets positioned at various distances. "Who is that shooter?" General Webb asked, pointing toward the range where a figure in standard military fatigues was taking careful aim at a target 300 yards away. Captain Rodriguez squinted in the direction the general was pointing. "That would be recruit Sarah Chen, sir. She's been here for 6 weeks and has shown exceptional marksmanship skills. Her scores are among the highest we've recorded in recent years." General Webb raised his eyebrows with interest. Exceptional marksmanship was always noteworthy, but what he was witnessing seemed to go beyond normal military training results. The recruit's stance was perfect, her breathing controlled, and her shots were finding their marks with mechanical precision. They walked closer to the shooting range, and General Webb could see the young woman more clearly. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with dark hair pulled back in regulation style. Her face showed intense concentration as she lined up another shot. What struck him most was how natural she looked with the weapon, as if the rifle was an extension of her own body. The range instructor, Sergeant Mills, noticed their approach and called for a temporary ceasefire. All the recruits lowered their weapons and stood at attention. Sarah Chen turned around, and General Webb got his first clear look at her face. She had steady brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around her without showing any emotion. There was something about her composure that seemed unusual for such a young recruit. "At ease, soldiers," General Webb said. But his attention remained focused on Sarah. There was something about her that didn't quite fit the typical profile of a new recruit. Her movements were too confident, too precise. Most new soldiers still carried traces of civilian awkwardness, but this young woman moved with the fluid grace of someone with extensive training. "Recruit Chen, step forward," he commanded. Sarah stepped forward and saluted smartly. "Sir." Recruit Chen reporting. "Sir." General Webb studied her for a moment. "I've been observing your marksmanship. Your scores are impressive. What's your background with firearms?" "Sir, I grew up on a farm and did some hunting with my father, sir," Sarah replied without hesitation. Her voice was steady and clear, showing no signs of nervousness despite being addressed directly by such a high-ranking officer. General Webb nodded, but something in his experienced mind was raising questions. Farm hunting didn't typically produce the level of skill he was witnessing. The precision and consistency of her shots suggested much more extensive training than casual hunting could provide. "What made you decide to join the military?" he asked, genuinely curious about her motivations. "Sir, I wanted to serve my country, and felt the military would provide the best opportunity to use my skills for a greater purpose, sir." The answer was textbook perfect, exactly what any good recruit should say. But General Webb had interviewed enough soldiers over the years to recognize when answers came too easily, too practiced. There was nothing wrong with her response, but it felt rehearsed in a way that made him wonder what she wasn't saying. "What's your current rank, recruit?" he asked casually, though he already knew the answer from her uniform insignia. "Sir, I am currently an E1, private." "Sir," Sarah responded immediately. It was a standard question with a standard answer. But as she spoke, General Webb noticed something that made him pause. As Sarah gestured slightly while speaking, the sleeve of her uniform shifted just enough to reveal the edge of what appeared to be a tattoo on her forearm. Tattoos weren't uncommon among military personnel, but something about this particular marking caught his attention. The small portion that was visible showed intricate detail work that suggested it was more than just decorative body art. The lines were clean and precise, and the partial design he could see looked like it might be some kind of symbol or emblem. General Webb's mind began working through possibilities. In his years of military service, he had encountered various specialized units and special forces groups, many of which had distinctive tattoos or markings that identified their members. The quality and style of what he glimpsed suggested this might be something more significant than typical civilian artwork. "Recruit Chen, you mentioned growing up on a farm. What state was that in?" He continued his casual questioning while trying to get another look at her forearm. "Sir, rural Montana, sir," she replied. But as she spoke, she seemed to unconsciously adjust her sleeve to better cover the tattoo. The movement was subtle, but General Webb caught it. In his experience, people only tried to hide tattoos when they revealed something they didn't want others to know about. His curiosity was now fully engaged. Montana was a state with several military installations and training facilities, including some that housed special operations training programs. The pieces were starting to form a picture in his mind. But he needed to see more of that tattoo to confirm his suspicions. "The weather out there can be quite challenging," he said, making conversation while watching for another opportunity to see her forearm. "I imagine that helped prepare you for military life." "Sir, yes, sir. The harsh winters definitely taught me about endurance and perseverance." Sarah agreed. As she spoke, General Webb noticed other details about her that were adding to his growing suspicions. Her boots, while regulation issue, showed wear patterns that suggested extensive use before arriving at basic training. Her hands showed calluses that spoke of years of weapon handling, not just recent training. Most telling of all, her eyes constantly scanned her surroundings in a way that suggested advanced situational awareness training. Everything about Sarah Chen was pointing toward the possibility that she had military experience far beyond what her current rank suggested. But why would someone with advanced training enter the military as a basic recruit? And what was that tattoo she was so carefully keeping hidden? General Webb decided to probe a bit deeper. "Have you had any prior military experience, recruit? ROTC programs? Military academies? Anything like that?" "Sir, no sir. This is my first experience with military service," Sarah answered without hesitation. The response came quickly, perhaps too quickly. General Webb had developed a keen sense for when people were being less than completely truthful. And something about her answer triggered that instinct. He glanced at Captain Rodriguez, who was standing nearby taking notes. "Captain, I'd like to speak with Recruit Chen privately for a moment." "Yes, sir," Captain Rodriguez replied, and he gestured for the other recruits and staff to move to a different section of the range. Once they had some privacy, General Webb's demeanor became more informal, though still authoritative. "Recruit Chen, I've been in the military for over 30 years. In that time, I've learned to recognize when something doesn't quite add up. Your marksmanship skills, your bearing, your situational awareness, these all suggest a level of training that goes beyond farm hunting and 6 weeks of basic training." Sarah maintained her military bearing, but General Webb could see a flicker of something in her eyes. Perhaps calculation, perhaps concern. "Now, I'm not suggesting you've done anything wrong," he continued, "but I am curious about your background. That tattoo on your forearm, for instance. Would you mind showing it to me?" For the first time since their conversation began, Sarah hesitated. It was only for a fraction of a second. But it was enough for General Webb to know he was onto something significant. "Sir, it's just a personal tattoo, nothing of military significance," she said. But her voice carried a note of tension that hadn't been there before. General Webb studied her face carefully. In his experience, the truth had a way of coming out, especially when someone was put under the right kind of pressure. He had a feeling that whatever Sarah Chen was hiding, it was about to become very important to understand. The morning sun was climbing higher, casting shorter shadows across the training ground. Around them, the sounds of military training continued, but General Webb's attention was entirely focused on the young woman standing in front of him. His instincts were telling him that this casual inspection was about to reveal something much more significant than anyone had expected. "Recruit Chen," he said quietly, "I think it's time you and I had a very honest conversation." Sarah Chen stood perfectly still, her military posture unwavering despite the intensity of General Webb's scrutiny. The sounds of training continued around them, but the space between the general and the recruit felt charged with unspoken tension. General Webb could see her mind working, calculating her next move like a chess player considering their options. "Sir, I understand your curiosity, but I assure you my tattoo has no bearing on my current military service," Sarah said, her voice maintaining its steady tone, though General Webb noticed she was choosing her words very carefully. General Webb had reached the point in his career where he could read people like books, and everything about Sarah Chen was telling a story she didn't want to share. Her stance was too perfect, her awareness too acute, and her responses too measured for someone with only 6 weeks of basic training. "Recruit Chen, let me be direct with you," General Webb said, stepping slightly closer. "I've trained thousands of soldiers, and I've worked with special forces units around the world. What I'm seeing here suggests training that goes far beyond anything available to civilians. So I'm going to ask you one more time, what's your real background?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah's eyes met his directly, and for a moment, General Webb saw something flicker across her face. A brief internal struggle between maintaining her cover and acknowledging what he'd figured out. Finally, Sarah seemed to come to a decision. With deliberate slowness, she reached up and began rolling back the sleeve on her right forearm. As the fabric moved up her arm, General Webb felt his breath catch in his throat. The tattoo was unlike anything he had expected to see on a basic recruit. It was a detailed, professional piece of artwork that depicted a coiled snake with a scope crosshair overlaying it. But what made General Webb's blood run cold was the small text beneath the image. "One shot, one kill." The motto of military snipers. But it wasn't just any sniper tattoo. General Webb recognized the specific design elements from his briefings on various special operations units. The artistic style, the particular way the snake was coiled, and most importantly, the small numbers 762 incorporated into the design. All of these pointed to one specific and highly classified unit. General Webb felt his posture stiffen involuntarily. The 762nd Special Operations Sniper Unit was so classified that most military personnel didn't even know it existed. It was a unit that handled the most sensitive and dangerous sniper operations, often working behind enemy lines for months at a time. The selection process was so rigorous that only a handful of soldiers were accepted each year, and the training was so intense that many didn't survive it. "Dear God," General Webb whispered, his mind racing through the implications of what he was seeing. "You're 762nd. Sarah's expression didn't change, but she didn't deny it either. The confirmation was written in her silence. General Webb took a step back, his mind struggling to process this revelation. The 762nd Unit was legendary within the highest levels of military command. These weren't just snipers. They were ghosts who could eliminate targets from impossible distances under conditions that would break normal soldiers. The unit's existence was known to fewer than 50 people in the entire military, and General Webb only knew about it because of his security clearance and his role in special operations oversight. "How many confirmed kills?" he asked quietly, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Sarah glanced around to ensure they were still alone, then met his eyes. 43 confirmed, sir." General Webb felt the world shift around him. 43 confirmed kills meant Sarah Chen was one of the most lethal soldiers in the entire military. To put that number in perspective, most combat soldiers never even fired their weapons at an enemy, let alone achieved a single confirmed kill. 43 meant she had been deployed on numerous missions, probably across multiple theaters of operation. "What the hell are you doing in basic training?" General Webb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. For the first time since their conversation began, Sarah's military facade cracked slightly. He could see exhaustion in her eyes, the kind that came from experiences most people couldn't imagine. "Sir, I requested reassignment after my last mission. I needed to step back from operational status for a while," she said. And General Webb could hear years of pain compressed into those few words. General Webb understood immediately. He had seen it before in Special Forces soldiers who had been pushed beyond normal human limits. The 762nd Unit conducted missions that required soldiers to spend months alone in hostile territory, making life and death decisions that would haunt normal people forever. Even the strongest minds eventually needed a break. "What happened on your last mission?" he asked gently, recognizing that he was treading on classified territory but needing to understand the situation. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of memories she clearly wished she could forget. 3 months in Syria, sir. Deep cover operation. I was tasked with eliminating a terrorist cell leader who was planning an attack on a refugee camp. The mission required me to position myself in a building overlooking his compound and wait for the right opportunity. She paused, and General Webb could see her hands trembling slightly, though her voice remained steady. "The shot was successful, but the target was holding his infant daughter when I took it. The intelligence report failed to mention his family was in the compound. I watched that little girl." Sarah's voice trailed off. General Webb felt a chill run down his spine. He had read enough classified mission reports to understand the psychological toll of such operations. The fact that Sarah had successfully completed her mission under those circumstances spoke to her professionalism, but he could also see the cost it had extracted from her. "So you requested a transfer to basic training to give yourself time to process," he said, understanding now why someone with her skills would voluntarily step down to recruit status. "Yes, sir. My commanding officer in the 762nd agreed that I needed time to reset mentally before returning to operational status. Basic training was supposed to be my way back to normal military life, at least temporarily." General Webb nodded, but his mind was already working through the complications this revelation created. Having a 762nd sniper in basic training was like having a Formula One driver taking driving lessons. Her presence here raised questions about security protocols, training procedures, and command structure that were far above his immediate authority to resolve. "Who else knows about this?" he asked. "At this base? Only you, sir. My records show a standard civilian background. The arrangement was made at the highest levels to ensure my cover remained intact." General Webb realized he was now part of something much bigger than a routine base inspection. The decision to place a 762nd operative in basic training would have required approval from the Pentagon, possibly from the Secretary of Defense himself. "Sarah," he said, dropping the formal military address for a moment, "I need you to understand something. What you've told me changes everything about this situation. I'm going to have to make some calls to verify your status and understand what my obligations are here." "I understand, sir," Sarah replied, her military bearing returning as she rolled her sleeve back down to cover the tattoo. General Webb looked around the training ground, suddenly seeing everything differently. The other recruits continued their exercises, completely unaware that they were training alongside one of the deadliest soldiers in the military. Their instructors had no idea they were dealing with someone whose skills far exceeded their own. "In the meantime," General Webb continued, "I need you to continue your training, as if this conversation never happened. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir. That was always the plan." General Webb studied her face one more time, seeing her now through completely different eyes. What he had initially taken for exceptional natural talent was actually the result of years of the most intensive military training imaginable. Her perfect marksmanship wasn't remarkable for a farm girl. It was routine for someone who had been trained to kill from distances of over a mile. "One more question," he said. "Why did you decide to trust me with this information? You could have continued to maintain your cover." Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "Because, sir, in my experience, the truth has a way of coming out eventually. You were going to keep digging until you found answers, and I decided it was better to control how you learned the truth rather than let you discover it on your own." General Webb couldn't help but smile slightly. Even in her explanation, Sarah was demonstrating the strategic thinking that made her valuable to the 762nd Unit. She had assessed the situation, calculated the risks, and made a tactical decision about information control. "You're right about that," he admitted. "I don't give up easily when something doesn't add up." As they stood there, General Webb realized that this chance encounter had put him in possession of information that could impact national security operations. His casual question about her rank had opened a door to a world of classified military operations that most people would never know existed. The morning sun was now high overhead, and the training schedule would be moving to the next phase soon. General Webb knew he needed to end this conversation and begin making the calls that would determine how to handle this unprecedented situation. "Recruit Chen," he said, returning to formal address. "Report back to your training group. Continue with your regular schedule while I determine the appropriate next steps." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, saluting crisply before turning to rejoin her fellow recruits. General Webb watched her walk away, marveling at how completely she disappeared back into the role of a basic trainee. Her movements became slightly less precise, her awareness slightly less acute, and her overall bearing shifted to match that of the other recruits. It was a masterful performance that demonstrated just how thoroughly she had been trained in covert operations. As he headed back toward the base headquarters, General Webb's mind was already working through the phone calls he needed to make. This situation was far beyond anything he had expected to encounter during a routine inspection, and the implications were only beginning to sink in. He had started the morning thinking he was observing a promising new recruit. Now he found himself holding classified information about one of the military's most elite operatives, and he had no idea what that knowledge was going to cost him. General Webb sat alone in his temporary office at Fort Harrison, staring at the secure phone on the desk. 3 hours had passed since his conversation with Sarah Chen, and those 3 hours had been filled with phone calls that had taken him deeper into the classified world than he had ever expected to go. The first call had been to his immediate superior, General Patricia Hayes at the Pentagon. Her response to his discovery had been immediate and decisive. "Do not discuss this with anyone else. We're sending a team." The second call had come from a number he didn't recognize, from a man who identified himself only as Colonel Morrison, and who seemed to know everything about General Webb's morning conversation despite not having been there. That conversation had been brief and unsettling. Now, as the afternoon sun cast different shadows across the base, General Webb was waiting for the arrival of people whose existence he had only theorized about before today. The world of special operations was about to become very real, very quickly. A knock on his office door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called. Captain Rodriguez entered, looking nervous and confused. "Sir, there are 3 vehicles at the main gate, requesting immediate access to the base. They have credentials I've never seen before, and they're asking specifically for you." General Webb nodded grimly. "Let them through, Captain. And clear the main conference room. I'll be conducting a classified briefing there." "Yes, sir. Should I notify the base commander?" "That won't be necessary. This matter is being handled at a level above base command." Captain Rodriguez looked puzzled but nodded, and left to carry out his orders. General Webb straightened his uniform and prepared himself for what he suspected was going to be a conversation that would change his career, possibly permanently. 20 minutes later, General Webb stood in the conference room as 3 people entered. The first was a woman in her 40s, wearing the uniform of an Army colonel, with insignia he didn't immediately recognize. The second was a man in civilian clothes who moved with the controlled precision of someone from the intelligence community. The third person made General Webb's breath catch in his throat. It was Sarah Chen, but not the Sarah Chen he had met that morning. Gone was the uncertain bearing of a recruit. The woman who entered the conference room moved with absolute confidence and authority. She wore a uniform with no visible rank insignia, and her entire demeanor had transformed into that of a seasoned special operations professional. "General Webb," the colonel said, "I'm Colonel Sarah Martinez, 762nd Operations Command. This is Agent David Park from Defense Intelligence, and I believe you've already met Operative Chen." General Webb struggled to process what he was seeing. The young recruit from the morning had been completely replaced by a woman who looked like she could take command of the entire base without breaking a sweat. "Please, sit down, General," Colonel Martinez continued. "We have a lot to discuss, and time is unfortunately not on our side." General Webb sat, his mind racing with questions. "I have to admit, I'm not sure what's happening here. This morning I thought I was dealing with an unusually skilled recruit, and now I'm apparently in a classified briefing about special operations." Agent Park leaned forward. "General, what you discovered this morning was not an accident. Operative Chen has been placed at this base as part of an ongoing operation, and your recognition of her background has accelerated our timeline significantly." "What kind of operation?" General Webb asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know. Colonel Martinez opened a file folder and placed several photographs on the table. General Webb could see they were surveillance photos of various individuals, some taken at what appeared to be military installations. "For the past 6 months," Colonel Martinez explained, "we've been tracking a network of individuals who have been selling classified military information to foreign governments. Our investigation led us to believe that someone at Fort Harrison is part of this network." General Webb felt a chill run down his spine. "Someone at this base is committing treason? We have strong evidence suggesting that's the case." Agent Park confirmed. "Operative Chen was placed here to identify and monitor the suspect while gathering evidence of their activities." General Webb looked at Sarah, who had remained silent during the briefing so far. "So the basic training story was completely fabricated?" Sarah spoke for the first time since entering the room. "Not completely, sir. I did request a break from operational status after my last mission. Colonel Martinez offered me the opportunity to combine my recovery time with this investigation. It seemed like an ideal solution. The problem," Colonel Martinez continued, "is that your discovery of her identity this morning may have compromised the operation. We need to determine whether the investigation can continue or whether we need to extract Operative Chen immediately." General Webb was beginning to understand the scope of what he had stumbled into. "What do you need from me?" Agent Park pulled out another photograph. This one, showing a man in a military uniform that General Webb recognized immediately. It was Major Thompson, the base operations officer he had met briefly during his morning tour. "Major Thompson is our primary suspect," Agent Park said. "We believe he has been photographing classified documents and passing them to foreign contacts during his off-base activities. Operative Chen was positioned to monitor his behavior and document his activities." General Webb stared at the photograph, trying to reconcile the friendly, professional officer he had met with the idea of a traitor selling military secrets. "What evidence do you have?" he asked. Colonel Martinez opened another folder. "Financial records showing deposits that don't match his military salary. Travel records showing meetings with known intelligence operatives from hostile countries. And most damning, communications intercepted by NSA that reference detailed information about training protocols and security procedures that only someone in his position would have access to." The weight of the situation was beginning to settle on General Webb. His routine inspection had accidentally uncovered an active counterintelligence operation targeting a traitor within the military. "What happens now?" he asked. "That depends partly on you," Sarah said, speaking directly to him for the first time since revealing her identity. "We're at a critical point in the operation. Major Thompson is scheduled to meet with his contact tomorrow night, and we believe he's going to hand over information about new training protocols that could compromise military operations worldwide." Agent Park leaned back in his chair. "The question is whether we can trust you to maintain operational security while allowing the mission to continue, or whether your involvement has made the situation too risky to proceed." General Webb understood that he was being evaluated, that his response to this situation would determine not only the fate of the operation but potentially his own career and security clearance. "What would you need me to do?" he asked. Colonel Martinez smiled slightly. Continue your inspection as if nothing has happened. Tomorrow evening, you'll be invited to attend a social gathering for base officers at the Officers Club. Major Thompson will be there, and he'll excuse himself early to meet with his contact. We need you to provide a reason for Operative Chen to be present at that gathering. How would I do that? General Webb asked. Sarah answered. You could select me as an exemplary recruit to serve at the officers' dinner. It's not unusual for high-performing trainees to be given such assignments, and it would position me to observe Major Thompson without raising suspicions. General Webb nodded slowly, beginning to see how the pieces would fit together. And then what? Oh? Then we gather the final evidence we need to arrest Major Thompson and dismantle his network, Agent Park said. The information he's planning to pass tomorrow night includes details about a new special operations training facility. If that information reaches foreign governments, it could compromise missions and endanger lives for years to come. The room fell silent as General Webb processed everything he had learned. When he had woken up that morning, his biggest concern had been whether the new recruits were meeting training standards. Now he was being asked to participate in a counterintelligence operation that could prevent classified military secrets from reaching enemy hands. General, Colonel Martinez said quietly, I need to be clear about what we're asking. If you agree to help us, you'll be committing to maintaining absolute secrecy about this operation. Possibly for years. You'll also be accepting personal risk, because if Major Thompson suspects anything, he could become dangerous. General Webb looked around the room at the three people who had just turned his world upside down. His military oath included a commitment to protect his country from enemies both foreign and domestic, and it appeared that this situation involved both. When I took my commission 30 years ago, he said finally, I swore to defend this country against all enemies. If Major Thompson is selling our secrets to foreign governments, then he's exactly the kind of enemy I swore to fight. Sarah smiled. And for the first time since their morning conversation, General Webb saw something genuinely warm in her expression. So you'll help us? Colonel Martinez asked. I'll help you, General Webb confirmed. But I have one condition. What's that? Agent Park asked. General Webb looked directly at Sarah. After this operation is over, I want to understand how we prevent situations like this in the future. If someone in Major Thompson's position can betray their country, we need better systems to detect and prevent it. Agreed, Colonel Martinez said. In fact, that's exactly the kind of thinking that makes you valuable to operations like this. As the meeting concluded and the participants prepared to leave, General Webb realized that his career had just taken a turn he never could have anticipated. He had started the day as a general conducting routine inspections, and he was ending it as part of a classified operation to catch a traitor. Tomorrow evening, he would watch a young woman whose deadly skills were hidden behind the facade of a basic recruit gather the evidence needed to protect national security, and he would play his part in ensuring that Major Thompson's betrayal of his country came to an end. The casual question about rank that had started this entire chain of events seemed like a lifetime ago. General Webb had learned that sometimes the most important discoveries came from paying attention to details that didn't quite fit, and that the price of protecting freedom often came in forms people never expected. As he prepared for what promised to be a very interesting tomorrow evening, General Webb couldn't help but wonder what other secrets were hidden in plain sight throughout the military, and whether he would ever look at a routine inspection the same way again.